happens, many around the world will be hoping and praying for someone who will finally bring about peace and security. As fate would have it, there is someone currently on the world scene who states that he is the great peacemaker the world desperately needs, that he and only he can save us from certain destruction. That man is Donald J. Trump. And the crazy part is, Donald Trump has been talking about saving the world for nearly 40 years. In April of 1984, an article appeared in the New York Times Magazine entitled The Expanding Empire of Donald Trump. In that article, Trump speaks about the danger of nuclear weapons to the world and how he alone had the skills to save us all. Quoting from the article, Trump said that his concern for nuclear holocaust is not one that popped into his mind during any recent made-for-television movie. He says that it has been troubling him since his uncle, a nuclear physicist, began talking to him about it 15 years ago. His greatest dream is to personally do something about the problem, and characteristically, Donald Trump thinks he has an answer to nuclear armament. Let him negotiate arms agreements. Negotiations is an art, he says, and I have a gift for it. The uncle that Trump was referring to is John G. Trump, who passed away in 1985 at the age of 78. John G. Trump was indeed a nuclear physicist and was a brilliant MIT scientist whose work involved X-rays and radar research during World War II. Most often, Donald would talk about his uncle as being a nuclear physicist as evidence that he, Donald, therefore also knows a great deal about nuclear weapons. It also proved, in Donald's eyes, that he was likewise brilliant, just like his uncle was. It's all about the genes, as he would say. On a side note, there is an interesting connection between John G. Trump and Nikola Tesla. After Tesla died in 1943, the FBI called in John G. Trump to look through all of Tesla's papers, reportedly because they were concerned that Tesla was developing what was called a death ray. Trump stated he found Tesla's research to be primarily of a speculative, philosophical, and promotional character, and that the papers did not include new sound, workable principles or methods for realizing such results. Interestingly, however, many of Tesla's files are now reportedly missing. But getting back to Donald Trump and his lifelong desire to save the world, a second article on this topic appeared just a few months after the New York Times Magazine story. This one was from November of 1984 and in the Washington Post, part of which reads as follows. Trump has a new idea. He wants to talk about the threat of nuclear war. He wants to talk about how the United States should negotiate with the Soviets. He wants to be the negotiator. He says he has never acted on his nuclear concern, but he said his good friend Roy Cohn, the flamboyant Republican lawyer, has told him this interview is a perfect time to start. It's something that somebody should do that knows how to negotiate and not the kind of representatives I've seen in the past. Trump added that he could easily learn everything he needs to know about nuclear weapons. It would take an hour and a half to learn everything there is to learn about missiles. I think I know most of it anyway. You're talking about just getting updated on a situation. Roy Cohn, the man Trump referenced as urging him to speak out on the issue of nuclear weapons, was a notorious and often despicable figure on the right for several decades. From his prosecutorial misconduct during the 1951 espionage trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, to being chief counsel to Senator Joe McCarthy during the infamous 1954 anti-communist hearings, to his 30-year career as an attorney in New York representing a myriad of sordid characters. Over Cohn's career, he was accused of theft, obstruction of justice, extortion, tax evasion, bribery, blackmail, fraud, perjury, and witness tampering. Perhaps above all else, though, Roy Cohn was a mentor to Donald Trump. He taught a young Trump to never apologize and to always attack. Interestingly, Cohn said this about Trump in 1984. What started off as a meteor mounting from New York and going upward is going to touch this country and parts of the world. Donald just wants to be the biggest winner of all. Cohn died in 1986. In a 1985 profile of Trump published in Manhattan Inc., later republished in a 1987 book called Manhattan Passions, Trump discussed his obsession with brokering this ultimate deal, stating, "Nothing matters as much to me now." Trump also stated that he was already dealing at a very high level on this, suggesting that he had connections in Washington and at the White House. At the time, this would have been the administration of Ronald Reagan. The picture on the cover of Manhattan Inc. showing Trump holding a dove brings home the point that Trump is aspiring to be the one who can finally bring us all the peace and security we so desperately need. Manhattan Inc. went out of business in 1991, but the original 1985 profile of Trump appearing in the magazine was reprinted in 2016 on Slate.com, and I'll put a link to that article in the description below. Speaking of Ronald Reagan, we know how Trump claims that he came up with the Make America Great Again slogan, but he almost certainly got it from Reagan during the 1980s.
For those who've abandoned hope, we'll restore hope and we'll welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again.
The year after the Manhattan Inc. profile, Trump would continue his goal of being the one person who can save us from nuclear weapons. In 1986, Trump would meet with one of the few Americans who knew Mikhail Gorbachev personally, as he sought information about the USSR's new leader. In that meeting, Trump would also reveal his plans to ask Ronald Reagan to post him to Moscow. The 1986 meeting was recounted by the man who was there and who met Trump, Nobel Peace Prize winner Bernard Lown. His story was published in 2017 by The Hollywood Reporter, part of which reads as follows. Donald Trump in the mid-1980s aggressively pursued an official government post to the USSR, according to a Nobel Peace Prize winner with whom Trump interacted at the time. He already had Russia mania in 1986, 31 years ago, asserts Bernard Lown, a Boston-area cardiologist known for inventing the defibrillator and sharing the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize with a top Soviet physician in recognition of their efforts to promote denuclearization. Lown tells The Hollywood Reporter that Trump sought and secured a meeting with him in 1986 to solicit information about Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev had become the USSR's head of state and met with Lown the year before. During this meeting, Lown says, the fast-rising businessman disclosed that he would be reaching out to then-President Ronald Reagan to try to secure an official post to the USSR in order to negotiate a nuclear disarmament deal on behalf of the United States, a job for which Trump felt he was the only one fit. After Reagan left office in 1989, Trump would begin to speak less and less publicly about his grand plans to save the world from nukes. Much of this was due to his financial problems during the early 1990s, which included 4 separate business bankruptcies in 1991 and 1992. As the 1990s and early 2000s sped by, Trump began to understand that he didn't need a president to appoint him to be negotiator for nuclear disarmament. In fact, he could actually be president and appoint himself. Trump's overwhelming desire to be president and his eventual victory in 2016 is thought by many to have largely been because of the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner, at which then-President Obama made several jokes at his expense.
Donald Trump is here tonight. Now, I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac?
However, while that event may have added fuel to the fire, Trump had been eyeing the White House several times before that night, as being president of the free world would have clearly been public confirmation that he was the biggest winner of all, to paraphrase Roy Cohn. In 2000, Trump entered the presidential race as a candidate for the Reform Party. Although he did not receive the party's nomination, he did gain traction as a presidential candidate after receiving more than 15,000 votes in the party's California primary. In 2004, while enjoying the early success of The Apprentice reality TV show, Trump once again considered a run for president and even talked about how Oprah Winfrey might be his running mate. Trump eventually decided not to run. In 2011, before the White House Correspondents' Dinner, Trump had repeatedly called for President Obama to release his long-form birth certificate, even questioning whether Obama was actually born in the United States. Perhaps sensing that his time had not quite yet arrived, Trump decided not to run in 2012 against Obama, but instead endorsed Mitt Romney. Soon, however, things would dramatically change. 4 years later, Trump would shock the world as he won the election in 2016 and became President of the United States. He not only became leader of the free world, he would finally be in a position to save the world. By the time 2017 rolled around, Trump had been talking about saving the world from nuclear weapons for well over 30 years, his ultimate deal. But after becoming president, Trump began to see another deal to be made, peace in the Middle East. According to him, it would be the deal of the century. On September 15th of 2020, Trump oversaw the official signing ceremony for the Abraham Accords. At the ceremony, Trump said the agreements would serve as the foundation for a comprehensive peace across the entire region. His usage of the word foundation is very noteworthy.
Together, these agreements will serve as the foundation for a comprehensive peace across the entire region, something which nobody thought was possible, certainly not in this day and age, maybe in many decades from now.
At that ceremony, Trump joked that he wanted the Abraham Accords to be named the Trump Accords. Everyone laughed, but they knew deep inside that it wasn't really a joke. Trump wanted his own name front and center on these accords, just like he does with everything else in his life. After these events, a number of Christians began to speculate if the Abraham Accords were, in fact, the fulfillment of the Bible's prophecy about the covenant with many, which we read about in Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Most of those Christians who wondered about the Abraham Accords' relevance to this prophecy didn't do so because they thought Trump might be the Antichrist, but rather how a future president might build upon this agreement to forge the eventual covenant with many. In fact, after Trump lost the 2020 election, the Biden administration began to embrace the Abraham Accords and sought to build upon it in several ways, for which Biden received generally positive reviews. This was likely angering Trump, who has viewed the Abraham Accords as his deal of the century, not Biden's. But before we get into that, let's look at Daniel 9:27 one more time, focusing on the beginning of the verse. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. First, there are Christians who see this verse as being fulfilled by Jesus. However, we need to remember that God does not make temporary 7-year covenants. Rather, his are eternal, which means that this verse is referring to the fake covenant of the Antichrist. Second, the word that we need to focus on in this verse is confirm, which, as we can understand from Strong's Concordance, is defined as a strengthening or making the covenant stronger. And the implication is that it's the many which strengthens the covenant. Here's what I mean. The agreement that eventually became the Abraham Accords consisted of only Israel and the United Arab Emirates at first, and a follow-up agreement between Israel and Bahrain a few weeks later. Those two agreements were then combined to make up the original Abraham Accords. However, having just two of Israel's neighbors as the foundation of the Abraham Accords is at odds with the meaning of the word many from Daniel 9:27. Checking Strong's Concordance, the word translated as many more accurately means abundance or even a multitude. In fact, Strong's Concordance tells us that Rob, the word translated as many, was indeed interpreted as multitude in two other verses in the King James, Exodus 12:38 and Exodus 23:2. So the covenant with many is just that. It's a covenant between Israel and a multitude or abundance of other nations. Here again is Daniel 9:27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. But if we recognize that confirm means to make stronger, and many refers to multitude, the verse could be understood as, with the multitude he shall strengthen the covenant. Something must happen that strengthens the covenant, and that something is the addition of the many. It becomes not just a simple agreement between Israel and two of her neighbors, but a mega deal involving several dozen countries. That is what strengthens or confirms the covenant. World events are now converging to the point where wars and rumors of wars are threatening our very existence, but where also the man who has envisioned himself as savior of the world for most of his adult life will be returning to power and have the perfect opportunity to be that savior. When Trump returns to power, one of his top priorities, other than vengeance, will be to reclaim the Abraham Accords as belonging to him, not Biden. And the best way to do that is to make them the Abraham Accords on steroids, the mega deal that brings the world peace and security. Trump is the ultimate big picture guy and believes that he has a gift for negotiating deals where no one else can. With his return to power, Trump would have his eye on one last mega deal, the one that saves the world and which gives him the honor and the glory. Trump's mega deal would roll different problems into one solution: the nuclear problem with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, peace in the Middle East, and even resolving the Russia-Ukraine war. A worldwide peace deal is on the horizon, and it will be because of Donald J. Trump. And this brings us to the conundrum of Trump being the peacemaker. On the one hand, he sees himself as the grand architect of the greatest deals in history, designed to rid the world of the threat of nuclear weapons, and being the only one who can bring peace to the Middle East. But on the other hand, we have Trump with a cavalier attitude towards nukes, saying in 2016 that he could envision them being used, and that Europe was not off limits. He will bring peace, but at its heart is a very fragile, temporary peace, one that he himself will break. And this is precisely what the Antichrist is prophesied to do in the Bible. He will bring about a covenant with many between Israel and their neighbors, and yet we are told that through peace he will destroy many. The Bible gives us a number of descriptions as to the character traits of the Antichrist, from having the mouth of a lion, to magnifying himself in his own heart, to being beloved in Israel, to casting truth to the ground, to being a vile person. All of these traits, and many more, match Trump perfectly. But beyond even that, Bible prophecy also talks about how the Antichrist will forge a covenant with Israel and many other nations, and that there will be talk of peace and security before sudden destruction comes upon the world. Everything is setting up perfectly for Donald Trump to get exactly what he's always wanted: to be recognized as the one who saves the world from nuclear weapons, to be the one who finally brings peace to the Middle East, to forge an Abraham Accords 2. And don't be surprised if Trump's new covenant with many will even be named the Trump Accords, or perhaps the Trump Covenant, so that he gets the glory, the honor, and the power. Everything is lining up for Trump to proclaim that he is the savior of the world.